Good evening and welcome to the Kaufman Corner. Off and running yet again here on a Sunday night. If you're catching us via the podcast, remember we stream live Sunday nights at 10 p.m. If you are so inclined to catch us live, you can be a part of the conversation in the comment section. Just make sure you're following both Rany and I on the Twitter at Jazayerli and at Soren Petro. You can follow us. We send out the link and you can be a part of it on Twitter. You can follow. You can watch the show on Twitter. You can be in the comment section on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Facebook, the three entities that you can be a part of the conversation. So we look forward to you joining us in the future. If you're catching us via the podcast, remember it don't cost you nothing. The likes, the loves, the subscribes, they're great for us. They don't really do that. Not really that big of an effort on your part. We'd appreciate it. And thanks to our friends, of course, at GAN Asphalt and Concrete, as of course, great. Anything parking lots you need, GAN has got you covered. And of course, they've got us covered here on the Kaufman Corner as well. So we welcome our great sponsor, GAN Asphalt and Concrete. Always great to have those fine folks. Great Kansas City company. Great supporters of Royals baseball and great supporters of the Kaufman Corner podcast. So thanks to having them along with us as always. Rany Jazayerli, the good doctor, Dr. Jazayerli, from
everywhere.
Everywhere. Rob and Rany and the Royals. Baseball Prospectus. That's what I can remember. One of the co-founders of Baseball Prospectus. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB, 810WHB.com, where you can catch my radio show. And of course, 2 to 6 p.m. Is when that streams live. Rany, let's start. We've got 40-man rosters, actual real baseball stuff. The Royals continue to try to fill out the coaching staff. We've got news on that, some reports on where that is going, and the front office as well to discuss. But let's start with the 40-man roster. I don't know if you know it. Really difficult to crack that 40-man roster. I mean, I don't know how many times during the course of the season I'm reminded by people, well, that would require a roster move. Settle down. Like I at any moment, I will trim 5 guys from a 40-man roster, any 40-man roster in baseball. And I swear to you, 95% of the time, for the next 20 years, no one will ever think another thing of any move I made. It will not come back and haunt me. But this is the great boogeyman of baseball teams. How do we make it all fit with that 40-man roster? The Royals facing that. And you've got at least one guy I know you want to start with on the discussion.
Well, we cannot possibly talk about the 40-man roster without discussing the momentous news that the Royals have already added 2 players to the roster. One of them, Soren Petro, is the second player in the Whit Merrifield trade. You may recall Max Castillo was the first guy and has already paid some dividends at the major league level. Soren Petro was injured at the time of the trade and came back and has actually played in the Arizona Fall League. And Royals must have seen enough from him to add him to the 40-man. That's a good sign. But the other man, Richard Lovelady, you may remember the name. A Hall of Fame name, absolute 80 name.
Fantastic favorite of my friends on the Border Patrol, Stephen St. John, I believe it is his.
I'd imagine if Richard ever decided to go by Dick, he would break the scouting scale. He'd be the first ever 85 grade name, Dick Lovelady. Yes. But still, Richard Lovelady, drafted a 10th round pick, and immediately we noticed him because of his name. But he's actually pitched his way through the system as a very interesting left-handed reliever. Made it to the major leagues, and immediately seemed to be buried by the Royals. And I just think it's somewhat symbolic that he's been added because the reports I had heard was that he didn't get along with the Royals pitching instruction. He seemed to question some of the things that the Royals told him, and he would ask, why do we do it that way? And I'm sorry, but if there's an argument between pretty much any player, pretty much any person on the planet, and the Royals' former pitching coach, I'm siding with the player. So Richard Lovelady did get buried for a while, managed to finally fight his way onto the roster in 2021, and got injured, blew out his elbow, and actually had Tommy John surgery in late September of 2021, but actually managed to get back on the mound late this year in AA and AAA, and pitched very well, 4 innings only, but 1 hit, 1 walk, 9 strikeouts. And I just find it very, very nice to see that he's back on the 40-man roster. He's still here. The people that he disagreed with are not. I think that's a symbol of where the Royals are headed, and hopefully a good omen for things to come.
Yeah, and this goes back, and hopefully this is like the last time we have a conversation about this, that this goes back to, remember, like, I hate to say it, but Brian Bannister's days. When he was here, he did things, and the Royals would no, this is how we do it. We do it this way. This is the way we've always done it. This is the way the Braves did it, would be what a lot of people would say. And I think that is, you know, it's not just having a philosophy, right, of getting the Rays and the Guardians and the Astros ideas, but being flexible. I think part of their philosophies are being flexible to each player. You have to mold something to each individual guy. And hopefully Richard Lovelady is the last guy that we hear. There was a no, here's what we do. You're a square peg, you fit in this round hole, right? Like the beauty of the Rays is finding the guy who's different. He's different than how everybody else does it, celebrating that, promoting that, refining that, making that even better, and making that a different look for everybody that's out there. It seems like Lovelady was one of the guys that, maybe the Rays would have promoted and showcased. Instead, the Royals tried to recreate because of their quote unquote old world ways of doing things, right?
Yeah, if you look at successful pitching philosophy, the organizations that do best with pitching, the best philosophy, the one common thread that they all have is that there is no common thread. They all have the flexibility. You talk about putting a square peg in a round hole. The smart organizations have round holes and square holes and triangular holes and star-shaped holes. They have holes for every kind of pitcher. You don't try and mold every pitcher to be the same. The problem with the Royals isn't necessarily that they had these rules that you have to have fastball command, that you have to put your you can't be a heel banger, you got to be a toe banger, all these rules here. The problem is that they tried to fit these rules to every single pitcher. And every pitcher is different. Every pitcher's motion is different. Every pitcher is more comfortable doing things differently. And if you cannot have the flexibility, you have guiding principles, absolutely. But if you don't have the flexibility to mold those principles to the pitcher instead of the other way around, you're not going to be successful. And I think the Royals are acknowledging, with a lot of the moves they've made over the last 2 months, that very point. And that's why, the Lovelady thing seems like a small thing, but I do think it is symbolic of a bigger change in this organization, hopefully a good change. And I think, for a guy who we barely have talked about for the last couple of years, I actually think he can be an important member of this team's bullpen going forward. He's certainly, anybody who doesn't have the stink of being part of the 2022 Royals bullpen immediately gets a step up in my eyes. And he's completely innocent of any involvement there. So I think he's a good pitcher, and I'm excited to see the Royals let him flourish and reach his full potential next year.
Lacking the stench of the Royals 2022 bullpen. That is a subtle way to put things, Rany. Very subtle way to put things.
Subtlety has always been my strong point. People sometimes don't know where I stand on topics at all. I'm so so wishy-washy.
What do you really think? Put it out there, Rany. Stop beating around the bush. Let's make it happen, right? No, listen, I get it. And I'm with you. And I think he is one of the guys because he's kind of a unique pitcher in the way he goes about doing things. And it would seem that overall having a broader perspective would help. And I think, as we get into the 40-man roster and you look at it, like, why is it, to me, the Royals' inability to make moves based upon the guys that they felt like, oh, well, we'd have to make a move we'd have to cut somebody in the 40-man roster, speaks to what we've talked about all along. They just don't seem to be able to value what's important, right? Like, and I'm all for loving your players, right? But you got to love the good ones more. and they don't, or you've at least, this comes back to what we've talked about, identify the good ones, right? And the 40-man roster is about identifying who is for real and how they consistently have 26-year-old guys that are in, AAA and have been in the minor leagues for 9 or 10 years and have yet to be able to crack the big leagues. And there's somebody that they can't make a move on because they're not sure yet. This might be a star, is unbelievable, while still having a number of guys be in that position ultimately be let go and go on to be very good someplace else. Like, where is the 26-year-old? How many guys? Whit Merrifield would be one, right? But how many guys did they have that they held a spot on the Rule 5 that went on to be dynamic players for them, as opposed to the guys, and some of them aren't even like 40s. They're bottom of the 25s. They're now 26-man roster. The Lopez's and how many times do we have the guy that they like had bounced around? What was his name? Bautista, 50 home run hitter with the Blue Jays, came through Kansas City, but did never make it big in Kansas City, right? There have been some guys that would go on to be good, and just part of their stop was Kansas City. How many guys were discovered here? I don't name any of them off the top of my head.
Yeah, Jose Bautista was here for a hot minute, and in the Royals' defense, that was, I think, under the Allard Baird.
That was, now that I think about it,
yeah, and he was there for like 3 weeks, and it was like 5 more years before he finally made the swing change that turned him from, still was a major league player. I mean, the Royals basically give him up for nothing, but went from that to a superstar. It's interesting you mentioned Whit Merrifield. Whit Merrifield could be the example of the guy that the Royals sort of, didn't make, kept believing in, even though he hadn't shown much in the minor leagues, and their faith was finally rewarded. Except, of course, that Whit Merrifield famously was not protected on the 40-man roster, and then any team in baseball could have taken him in the Rule 5 draft. That's Whit Merrifield's example of why the Rule 5 draft is so tantalizing, because there are players out there in the minor leagues who, even after 4 or 5 years in the minor leagues, because that's how much service time you need before you become eligible, still have not shown any major league ability, and yet go on to have productive careers. But the Royals didn't see it with Whit Merrifield, just like everyone else did. So, the Royals, the last 3 or 4 guys on their 40-man roster, always there are guys there just kind of make you scratch your head. Why is this guy protected? What is it that the Royals see in this guy that no one else does? I don't want to pick on anybody specifically, but since you accused me of being subtle and wishy-washy, I feel like I have to put my foot down and be specific. Colin Snyder is a guy on the 40-man roster, and Colin Snyder, we've talked about him a couple of times on this podcast, but he's a guy that the Royals added to the 40-man roster last year, and at least from his performance record, there was no explanation as to why. I mean, a 4.48 ERA in the minor leagues in 2021 as a reliever. There was nothing in his record that said he was going to be better than that. He was a 12th round pick out of college. They really liked him. He made the bullpen out of spring training, pitched really well for like 2 weeks, and then just everything fell apart. And he ended up with a 6.55 ERA with the Royals. He went down to Omaha. He had an ERA of over 5 with more walks and strikeouts. He's still on the 40-man roster. Now we're going to talk about the players that they need to add who are Rule 5 eligible, that they need to add to the roster between now and Tuesday. I believe the deadline is Tuesday evening. Anybody who is Rule 5 eligible currently and is not on the 40-man roster by then can be drafted. So the Royals have some decisions to make, but those decisions should be made easier by the fact that there are several guys on the 40-man roster right now that they can easily remove, and not be worried that if they lose that player that it's gonna come back to haunt them.
Let's start the roster moves that were made in addition to Richard Lovelady. Jacob Brents and Angel Zerpa were added off.
They were on the 60-man disabled list, or injured list, I should say. Yes.
As is one other name.
Of course, Adalberto Mondesi.
Adalberto Mondesi.
We've renamed the injured list the Adalberto Mondesi list.
Yes, and I will throw in Samad Taylor has also been added from AAA. Thoughts on Samad Taylor? Because this seems like same old for me on Samad Taylor. I will give you some numbers for people to chew on for Samad Taylor. 24 years old, 5'10", 160. Oftentimes those weights are dated from when they were drafted. When you look at the minor league numbers, I'm hoping he weighs more than 160 pounds at this point at 24 years old. But this past year, 258 batting average, 337 on base. He hit 9 home runs to go along with 10 doubles. He had 2 triples, slugged 426 for a 763 OPS. That was in 70 games. at AAA. The previous year, he had an 888 OPS at AA, again at age 23. This smells very same old to me.
I think I'm going to give it a pass, if only because, again, Taylor was a guy that the Royals traded for in the Whit Merrifield deal at the deadline, knowing that he was injured and that he would not, he would not play for a couple of months, basically until the end of the season. And his numbers this year were not bad in AAA. He came back for the Arizona Fall League. He did not play well. He hit 152, but I think the important thing is he was healthy. He played in 21 games, stole 9 bases. I mean, he's a Royals player through and through with the speed as being his primary asset. But he is a guy who has played some outfield as well as second base. So I think a lot of people see him almost like that Merrifield, that role. That kind of unusual role, being able to play the outfield and then a key middle infield position. But he played only second base in the Arizona Fall League. So I think the Royals, this is the Royals figuring they are buying some time to get a full evaluation of him next year. And as we will go through right now, it's not like they don't have spots on the 40-man roster. The 40-man roster is they can make room for him. I don't think that if this is not like the Rays, you want to talk about a team that's in a roster crunch. The Rays right now, they've already traded a couple of guys because they have, in addition to they have something like 45 guys on their 40-man roster because they had several guys who were on the 60-day injured list, and guys on the 60-day injured list do not count towards your limit. And they have 5 or 6 premier guys that they want to add who are Rule 5 eligible. So that's a tough problem to be in. It's a good problem to have when you have more talent than you can fit. The Royals are not at that point right now. So the problem with adding a guy like this is that if he doesn't progress, the problem is you can't take a guy off the 40-man without basically exposing him to waivers. Any team can claim him. If you don't add him and he slips through the Rule 5 draft, because if you're taking in the Rule 5 draft, the team that takes him has to keep him on their major league roster for pretty much all of the next season. So a borderline guy is not going to get taken. And then if he, let's say he struggles, if he gets injured the following year, then he's not on your 40-man roster. You can keep him around another year without any worries. But once you put him on the 40-man roster, it's very difficult to get them off without making that player eligible to be taken by any team, and they don't have to keep him on their major league team. So that would be the concern here, is that if a guy who's borderline, you put him on the 40-man, and then he's still borderline a year from now, you're kind of stuck. And I think the Royals have been burned by that sometimes, where they put a guy on, they're worried about losing him, and then he doesn't really develop, but he doesn't really take a step backwards, and then you're stuck because you can't get rid of him easily. You don't want to just lose him 100%, but that roster spot has value. So I'm okay with this for now. I think that we kind of knew going into that trade that this is somebody they wanted to take a look at after he got healthy.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, but we'll go over the other people that can be taken off the 40-man and who needs to be added on.
So let's do that right now. What are we talking about as far as who is someone that we can see them moving on from, that really doesn't need to be there?
Okay, so right now the Royals have 39 players on their 40-man roster, at least according to their website, which I think is a good place to start. And so the question is, who needs to be added? According to MLB Pipeline, there are 4 guys on their top 30 Royals prospect list who are Rule 5 eligible if they are not put on the Royals 40-man roster this week. And the names, those 4 guys, there's 3 guys. I added a 4th. The 3 guys that they have on their list, one of them is TJ Sakema, who was one of the players they got in the Andrew Benintendi deal. And so many Royals pitchers struggled after he joined the organization. They promoted him to Double-A as well. He did not pitch particularly well in Double-A. He did also go to the Arizona Fall League and made 3 starts. Was actually decent, but it was only 3 starts. But he's left-handed. If he doesn't make it as a starter, I think they certainly see him as a reliever. I think that it would be risky to not put him on the 40-man. And I think certainly having just made him one of the headliners in this trade, that you're not likely to let him go. So Sakema's probably going to be on there. The second name is interesting, but I think we need to talk about it, which is Alec Marsh. We've talked about him. You talk about a guy who's sort of the poster child for the Royals, not having, not developing pitchers at the minor league level any better than they did at the major league level. I think Alec Marsh has to be, at the top of that list because he has tremendous stuff. He, I think, was it the Northwestern Arkansas single season record for strikeouts this year. I mean, he had a tremendous strikeout rate, and yet he had an ERA of over 7 as a starter. He started 25 starts, 1 in 15. We don't talk about win-loss record on this show very often for good reason, but 1 in 15 still catches your eye. 7.32 ERA, that catches your eye. And yet 147 strikeouts and 114 innings.
How do you do that, by the way? He was a guy that we featured a couple of times during the course of the season. Like, it is one of the bigger anomalies because if you just roll back not that long ago, I mean, this was a guy that was considered to be one of the top prospects in their organization, and and I'm not going to say just fall off, because part of it was he was electric as far as the strikeouts go. Yet overall, the results were disastrous. Like, how does that happen?
Some of it, I mean, some of it's bad luck. His batting average on balls in play, I don't have that calculated from minor leaguers, but I mean, it would not surprise me if it was close to 400. I mean, it was very high. But that to me is a sign of bad pitching instruction, because the strikeout rate is a sign of stuff. He has the ability to miss bats. So how is it that when you don't miss the bats, they're hitting barrels like that? And to me, if there is one pitcher that I'm fascinated to see how they will do with a new pitching regime in place next year, it's Alec Marsh. I should point out he actually got promoted to AAA at the very end of the season and actually pitched well in Omaha, 2 starts, 10 innings, 2 runs. So, right. I mean, there's definitely talent there. You don't normally add a guy with a 7 ERA, but given that he's not been tried in the bullpen yet, the other thing I'll say is the one good thing about his season was he stayed healthy. I mean, he briefly looked in 2021 like he might be the best Royals pitching prospect in the system early in the year. And then I think he had a bicep strain. He had some arm-related troubles and missed most of the rest of the season. So the fact that he at least was able to take the ball every 5th game, 27 starts total in the minor leagues, that's a promising sign. And I absolutely could see a scenario where a team takes a flyer on him in the Rule 5 draft with the idea of putting him in the bullpen. And, in spring training, he doesn't look good. You give up, you give him back to the team that you drafted him from. You lose $25,000 or $50,000, but that's absolutely a flyer worth taking if you were, I don't know, the Nationals or some 100-loss team going nowhere. So I think I think the risk of letting him be exposed is too high to do that. I think he has a future in the majors, whether it's in the rotation or the bullpen. I think he needs to be.
I think the Royals have to keep him because he's exactly the kind of guy you'd like to see them poach, right? Like, they're the team that nobody up at the top would go get him because they can't afford to have him messing around and not succeeding. But can we agree that the comments of J.J.Picollo were, in all of his conversations, one with me directly on my radio show, and then also in his press conference, seemed to be pointing towards 24? That right? Like, that question about, so if that's the case, then if there's an Alec Marsh, if there's an Alec Marsh out there, that's exactly the kind of guy you want to see them take a shot at, right? So you can't let that guy go when he's in your own organization.
Yeah, no, I mean, he is the sort of, certainly from a statistical profile, he's exactly the sort of pitcher that a team that is rebuilding or is looking to the future and is willing to throw darts and hope that they hit on something. That's the guy you target. So, and it's one thing if you are drafting him in the Rule 5 draft, knowing you have to keep him in the major leagues the next year. In the Royals case, they put him on the 40-man, he can go back to the minor league. So, like, the downside is much less. The opportunity cost of keeping him is much lower. You just need a 40-man roster spot. We'll get to that, but yes, there is a spot there, I think, for him. So that's number 2. Number 3 is Diego Hernandez, who we have also talked about on this on this show, and is an outfielder who made it to Double A. We talked about him when he was red hot in A ball, got to Double A, and actually hit pretty much as well in Double A as he did in A ball in about 32 games. For the season, he hit 284 with 9 home runs, which for a guy who had hit 2 home runs in his professional career before this season is a good sign. A sign of some developing power. 40 steals in 52 attempts, and by all accounts, plus defense in center field, and was only 21 years old. I think he's another guy I would absolutely protect because he's the kind of guy. I actually, given his age and the developing power that we're seeing, the upside here is of an everyday player in the major leagues. I'm not saying he will get there. I think it's less than 50-50, but everyday outfielder, an Ender Inciarte type center fielder, very good defender who can hit 300-ish, let's say 280 with a little bit of pop. That's a 3-win player in the major leagues. If he can become that guy, you would be foolish to lose it. And the kind of skill set he has speed, he has defense that will play at the major league level now, makes it tempting for a team to take him and be like, we can devote a roster spot to this guy because even if he's not ready to hit yet, he can spend a year as a defensive replacement and pinch runner, and while we work with him, and then we can send him back to AAA a year from now. So I think it would be too risky to expose him.
How does the 344 minor league on base percentage play for the big leagues in your mind at this age? How much can that translate to the big leagues?
That is probably his biggest weakness. I would say, at this point, that's a sub 300 OBP. Of course, in 2022, Major League OBP was barely 310, so I'm not sure how bad that is really. But to me, the most important stat I look at with him is not OBP; it's his age. If he was 23, I don't think we'd be having this guy. 21, he'll be 22 in later this month. Okay, but he played the entire season at 21. And the amount of improvement he made from this season to last, in terms of his pop, in terms of moving up a level, and then getting promoted mid-season and not missing a beat, I just think that's a guy you can't afford to let go.
Okay, and then you want to add one to the mix.
Well, I'm going to mention I've seen he's not on the MLB Pipeline top 30 prospects. I've seen his name out there, and that's John Rave, who was the Royals' I believe the 5th round pick in 2019, the 1 round after Michael Massey. He's an outfielder, got a good year in Double A. He profiles to me more as a 4th outfielder, maybe 5th outfielder type. He has he's not an average hitter like Diego Hernandez. He has pop. He had 14 home runs in Northwest Arkansas and a good plate discipline. He also played in the Arizona Fall League. Didn't hit that well there. He's a guy I think the Royals can probably risk losing because he strikes me as a guy who I think might develop into a 4th outfielder type in the major league level, but I don't see him as an everyday guy. I don't think he's as useful a player to have on the bench for a team drafting a Rule 5 guy. So I think the risk of him being drafted is also less. I'll mention him for completeness sake, but I really don't think that the Royals need to worry too much there. But the first 3 guys we talked about are all need to be added. I'll be honest. I think I kind of expected there to be more names that needed to be added. I think last year there were certainly more, but the way it works is that you're eligible for the Rule 5 draft after your 4th professional season if you're a college draftee, and after your 5th if you're a high school draftee. And so what that means is if the guys the Royals took in the 2018 draft out of high school or the 2019 draft out of college are the ones who are eligible. Well, in 2018, the Royals took pretty much all college guys. So all those guys were added last year. And you think about, obviously Brady Singer and all those pitchers. Jonathan Bolin, hasn't made the major leagues, but he's on the 40-man roster. And in 2019, the Royals, it wasn't a bad draft because you have Bobby Witt at the top, and then the Royals had Michael Massey in the 4th round and Vinny Pasquantino in the 11th. That right there, there's a chance that could actually be a very good draft for the Royals. But aside from those 3 guys, the only other guy in their draft class who's really banging on the door is Alec Marsh, who we talked about. So on some level, 3 guys is actually not a lot. And I don't think it'll be difficult to find a spot for all 3 of them.
Am I right on this? I'm counting this again. 39 on their 40-man?
That's what I counted.
Okay.
So if you got the same number, I feel better.
Right. So because I'm like, all right. So that would give them 1 spot right there. Let's cut 2 guys. Let's say they need 3, because I'm with you on Rave. I don't think you need to have a spot for Rave. And we'll get to, by the way, I've had some people question, yes, we are going to talk about the reports of a bench coach. No reports yet of a pitching coach, but we're going to talk about the bench coach here in a little bit. Let's cut 2 guys. Could you possibly find 2 guys to let go to make room? I mean, is it where could we start, Rany?
It's going to be difficult, man. But I already mentioned Colin Snyder, so we can start with that one.
Okay.
And then you may have noticed on the hitting side that there's a certain Ryan O'Hearn who's still listed. I wish him all the best. I'm glad he got a paycheck in the major leagues all year this year, but I think it's time to say goodbye to Mr. O'Hearn. What is ironic to me is that because the Royals don't have that many players to add, it would not shock me if they ended up cutting 2 players not named Ryan O'Hearn. That doesn't mean he'll necessarily make the roster, because keep in mind, if they sign free agents, if they make any other moves, they will need other roster spots. But it's a testament to the weakness on the bottom of this roster that Ryan O'Hearn doesn't have to be cut. I think I'd sleep a little better knowing that they had finally cut him, because if they don't, that always brings the possibility they'll keep him. But there are other people they could certainly look at. On the hitting side, the only other guy that I think is even remotely possible of being cut would be Brent Rooker, who the guy they traded Cam Gallagher for midseason as a 4th outfielder, is a lefty masher. Didn't really hit much in the majors for the Royals, but it was very few at bats. But certainly not somebody you could definitely cut and not lose any sleep over. But on the pitching side, there are several guys that we could look at, we can talk about. The big question, I don't know if they'll do this now because the deadline for tendering contracts is later, but is Brad Keller somebody that they bring back?
Well, Brad Keller is the immediate name that I go to, because there are projections of $7 million for Brad Keller.
For the money there, I think if that's the choice, I think you got to let him go. I think the potential there is that if the deadline isn't now, that you have time to negotiate with him, try and bring that number down significantly. And the leverage is that if he doesn't accept it, you'll let him go, and he's not getting $7 million from anyone else for next year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Brad Keller is a no-brainer. You've gone. Now, I will say this: if you've got a new regime, and we mentioned new pitching coach, somebody wants to take a shot at him, I get that. But at $7 million, I mean, if that's going to prohibit you from making another move, then you got to walk, right? Like I saw one of the comments was, I think Cam put it up there about $32 million payroll. We're also projecting $32 million in arbitration cases and everything. We're looking at like $65 million payroll, which is still well below the league average, puts you about $35 million. I would say even in a rebuilding mode, I think $100 million is a fair target. I don't think they're going to get there, though. Based on what I've heard from J.J.Picollo, he seems to think going out and getting somebody outside is something that you would do next year, right? So I don't see, like, the idea of the trade that hurts, that, that phrase was coined back in 2013 when, we had Jim Bowden on and he talked about it. And of course, that offseason, they made the move for James Shields and Wade Davis. And I think a lot of people are expecting that. It sounds to me like they're targeting more that this isn't the offseason for that next year's the offseason for that. But, if you are going to make that kind of move and you have parameters, then $7 million could get in the way of it. And my frustration in hearing that, and as we break down the 40-man roster, which we both agree there are plenty of opportunities to create space, is the idea that there's going to be this magical, like, massive overhaul, 3 guys signed and 2 big trades in one off season. To me, your head is on a swivel for value at all times. And I get it that in signing free agents, which we'd all love because you don't have to give up any talent to go get them. In signing free agents, it might not be the time that, quality free agents are willing to sign on to this ball club. They may not have proven that they're enough of a contender for people to sign on to it. I get that. But if they will, you should always have your head on a swivel, and it should not be all about this. Well, next year we can really make a sales pitch. Somebody will sign on, add to your ball club, because right now this is a window, right? With all the guys that have debuted this year, it's going to be a window of opportunity and not sustained success over the long haul. and I would like to see a move come this offseason. But I don't think
we're in agreement on that. We've talked about this. Like one off season is not enough time to do all the things the Royals need to do. And so putting all that pressure on the following off season, if you want to win in 24 is unrealistic. They need to start now. And that's why I say, it's not just about, they need to clear 2 roster spots by Tuesday, and that's easy. But they will, I would hope, need to clear 2 or 3 more spots after that for players that they bring in from outside the organization. And I think they can do that. I mean, so we mentioned Rooker and Keller in addition to O'Hearn and Colin Snyder. Jake Brentz was a guy who had a very good year in 2021 and was just absolutely awful for like 2 weeks at the beginning of the season before he finally went on the injured list and missed most of the season in AAA. Now, I mean, he's a guy who throws in the upper 90s and was a real revelation in 2021. So if he's fully healthy, I'm not saying you have to cut him, but he's certainly one of the next guys I would consider on that list. And then, you have someone like Wyatt Mills that they brought in. I think he was the guy they got for Carlos Santana. I like him. Him and Jose Cuas they both fill a role for me as kind of those almost sidearm right-handers. And I think they both show talent. They both just walked too many guys, the trait they shared with literally everybody else on the team. But maybe you make an argument that you don't need 2 guys who both profile the same way. So those are guys you could look at. And then, we're not even talking about Jackson Kowar and some of these guys who've lost their luster, but I think still have enough talent. You just don't just cut them. Those may be guys that if you have to, you could probably trade them. Maybe you trade them for 30 cents on the dollar, but that's still better than getting nothing for them.
Yeah, no, those are moves that they can look at. I do want to bring up the name Adalberto Mondesi. I believe, we heard the comments of J.J.Picollo coming down the stretch run, and we touched on it for a brief moment after he made them, that Adalberto Mondesi is going to be the starting shortstop for this baseball team going into spring training.
That's a lovely thought.
I mean, it's do you like can we agree that if everyone that's on this roster right now is still on this roster, this 40-man doesn't have some kind of adjustment, what has really changed?
Yeah, I mean,
there's no way you can bring in, Quatrero and his bench
Hoover,
coach, who's going to get to
guy.
in a minute. Yep. Paul Hoover, a pitching coach and all this, and everybody, the new eyes look at it and go, "Yep, thumbs up. These are the guys. Let's rock." Like, I do. To me, we've said it. Mondesi either needs to be extended. You need to get him to agree to pennies on the dollar for what his upside is, and so that you make sure that you're going to get some return on this constant investment in him, or they need to walk now. And I think if one of those two things doesn't happen, I'll be very disappointed, because to me, it's just same old, same old.
Well, I mean, the expression "talk is cheap," right? It works both ways, which is like talk is cheap. You haven't done anything yet, so I'm not going to assume you're going to do anything. But at the same time, the flip side of that is when the Royals say they're not going to do anything, or that Adalberto Mondesi is our starting shortstop for next year, the implication there being that they're not doing anything. I also think talk is cheap. Like I think that the personnel moves that they have made on the coaching staff are fundamentally irreconcilable with bringing this roster back essentially intact. There are going to be roster moves between now and spring training. If we're into mid to late January on this podcast and we're still looking at Adalberto Mondesi being the everyday shortstop, I think you and I will have some more pointed words to describe that. But obviously, I mean, they have Bobby Witt Jr. Like, it's even if they did nothing in that role, they have options. I think if not either a shortstop or a third baseman, it seems fairly likely that might be an area where they will try to upgrade. I just feel like right now their focus is on the coaching staff, and J.J.Picollo is saying words like he did to buy themselves time to get the coaching staff in order before they start making some player changes. I think what you're saying though is something we've talked about Mondesi, which is I think it would kind of be a ballsy move to double down a little bit and say, look, we actually believe in this guy enough that we're going to give him 2 or 3 years because we can get him cheap right now, and there's no point in keeping him around for 1 year if we don't think we're actually going to win in 2023. And even if he has a great season, we're not going to, we're gonna have to pony up for him next year. So that's one of those more untraditional moves that I think the old Royals would never have considered,
Right.
but that may be on the board now. I'm kind of
I want to
curious.
entertain this one from Brad. Maybe a better question: who wouldn't you trade, if anyone? We talk about the trade that hurts and that we don't think it's coming, and we can talk about and there isn't a Will Myers, right? And Will Myers, I always bristle at that. They traded the number one prospect. They traded the number one prospect at that time, which in season or after the wave has come up and the next wave isn't there. It was kind of this unique. It's kind of this time where you haven't reset the prospect list, but it's fine. They don't have a Will Myers right now. Right.
Right. Well, I mean, Bobby Witt was, essentially
Right.
that Will Myers last year. Do you?
And he's a significantly better prospect then.
I
And
think so.
certainly
I
now.
think so. I mean, I will say, look, I don't want to shortchange what Will Myers was because what we thought he was, because what we thought Will Myers was is in large part why I embarrassed myself with all of my takes on the Will Myers trade. He was the minor league player of the year. He wasn't the number one prospect, but I want to say he was like number 4, number 5, if you look at like Baseball America's list after that season. But when you say who they wouldn't trade, what's interesting, the Royals wouldn't trade Eric Hosmer or Mike Moustakas, but they would trade Will Myers. Why is that? I think we have a better understanding of the personalities of those three players to understand why the Royals were more amenable to trading Will Myers. If the Royals had an elite prospect right now that maybe they suspected wasn't quite as elite as everyone else thought, that's the guy. Yeah, that's the guy you trade in the trade that hurts because you can get maximum value for him. You can get a Will Myers like return. Unless the Royals somehow have come down on Bobby Witt Jr., I don't see that player, and I don't think that's the case. I think
Great.
Bobby Witt, with all of his struggles, even in what we call struggles, it was a decent player in 2022 as a 21, 22-year-old rookie. I mean, I suppose, could they trade Vinny Pasquantino if somebody just loaded up the dump truck and just dropped, a gold mine of talent? No, I don't like to say that anybody is untradeable. It's all the answer is, okay, will you trade player X should always be, it depends. If you offer me enough, nobody is untradeable.
Right.
And I think the Royals have gotten far more danger or far more trouble in the past under the Dayton Moore era by saying player X is not tradable. That is far more dangerous than putting an open for business sign, because you can always say no, but you'll never know what you could have gotten if you don't entertain offers in the first place.
I like this from Matt. He says, I would not trade Singer or anyone else's fair game, even Bobby Witt Jr. He said, I had to trade Prado, Melendez, Mondesi, Salvi if they could. I get that. And listen, I'll trade anybody. If I'm the general manager.
I was going to say, if anything, Singer
anyone
might be the guy to trade. If you don't believe, if you believe that this was sort of his absolute apex as a star, he can't get better than this because he's still only using his changeup, 8% of the time or whatever. And, he did have a little bit of batting average on balls and play luck this year. Like his FIP was a little higher than his ERA. If you believe that this is a little better than what he really is, and there's a team out there that looks at him as a budding ace, Brady Singer is, I absolutely will, he's a pitcher. Pitchers get hurt. If I can get two elite top hitting prospects for him, I mean, yes, we've talked all about the Royals, pitching crop or hitting crop for 2022, but you can always have more hitters. I have no problem with having too many hitters because you can always find a place for those guys. I don't believe in pitching as the currency of baseball. I believe hitting is the currency of baseball.
I agree. And I like what Terry says. Anything is fair game if it makes the team better. 100%. And that's the thing. Are you going to, like, when you say, well, I'd trade Brady Singer, people are like, I mean, how can you trade him? He's the guy who finally got a pitcher that's. No. I'm not moving him for Carlos Santana, right? Like I'm talking that if somebody wants to give you 3 high-level prospects, or they're going to give you a 24-year-old hitter with 5 years of controllable Like it has to make sense. No, I'm not just. No one is trading quality just for the sake of trading it. But if you get, and like Matt said, listen, I get it. I really don't like the idea of trading starting pitching when we're starved for it. I understand that, and nobody would just for the sake of trading him. Any deal that makes your ball club better, this team needs to do. Like, stop worrying about what the name is, what they've done. Everybody is available. That is the case of the Tampa Bay Rays. Like, you want to play Rays baseball? Everyone's available at all times, at any time. Anybody can go. If it makes the ball club better, they will move them. The likelihood that you will find a deal for Brady Singer that makes this ball club better is unlikely. So no one needs to sweat the idea that Brady Singer's on the block and going to be sent for anything very quickly. But the concept of we won't move Brady Singer is part of the reason why they never do anything. Right? Because at least the conversation starts. If somebody calls you and goes, we're interested in Singer. All right, I'm here to listen. Okay, this. Nah, not so much. Well, who else do you like? Who else would you put in? And you start swapping names. I'm going to tell people, I've talked to enough general managers, right, for a long time. I'm old, okay? In this business, I am old. And I've talked to a lot of general managers. It's not that much different than your fantasy league. I know they try to sit there and at the podium and act like that they are living on another plane, in another realm, and it's a concept that you can't possibly, as a fan, get your arms around. That's BS, okay? It's not that much different. And you sit there, you tell everybody, like, let me give you a tip for your fantasy league. Everyone's available. Just get the jackass on the phone that will make a mistake and start talking. And you can talk them into something else. They call you about the player you don't want to move. Fine. You talk them over to the player you are willing to move. And I think that's been sorry, Randy, but I think that's been one of the reasons why the Royals have these sacred cows that are non-starters, and so the conversations never start happening. And I think that's I'm hoping that changes now with this new regime.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like, I like your point that it's not that different than your fantasy league. It's basically it's just like your fantasy league. If your fantasy team was you and 10 of your closest friends were all on one team, and you had an army of assistants, and you had reams of data, and the money involved was an exponential amount more than whatever you have on the line in your fantasy league. Like, the mechanism is the same. You get on the phone, you talk to somebody, in that moment you are treating the players like assets, like a stock, like crypto, although that's a terrible analogy right now. But the point is that that's the way the conversations happen. And I think the Royals are just like everybody who's ever played fantasy ball. There's always that one guy in your league. You call about one of his players. Nah, I'm not moving him. Nah, I'm not. And pretty soon you just learn that guy's not worth even bothering with. He loves his players. He'll never, or he'll the amount that they ask for any player is so outrageous. And in a fantasy league, that's not much fun because trading is part of the fun. But the Royals are that guy that just don't you don't want to get on the phone very often, trade guys. And just like we've all been in that league where somebody makes a trade that is so egregious you almost want to call the commissioner and have it overturned. I mean, it happens a lot less today than certainly 30, 40 years ago or 10 years ago, but it can still happen. I mean, I still remember, the closest example, my favorite example of recent times that was basically like, the new guy in your fantasy league who just makes a trade that makes every other manager furious because it was so obviously lopsided, was when Dave Stewart was general manager of the Arizona Diamondbacks and traded and wanted Shelby Miller, who was, a number 3 starter at his peak and was not in full health. This is only 7 years ago? Yeah, gosh. December 2015, traded for Shelby Miller. Yeah, for Dansby Swanson. Mm-hmm. That's the name you've brought up, who had just been the number 1 pick in the draft. And another name I mentioned earlier today, Ender Inciarte, who was like an intriguing prospect who ended up being was a tremendous defensive center fielder for the Braves for a couple of years and was a lot of value. There were a few other guys. Gabe Spire, who was a former Royal in that trade. I'm looking it up here. But the point is, it was like unbelievable. And Shelby Miller was like terrible for the Diamond. He got hurt shortly afterwards. No, and actually, but in his first year, 3-12 with 6.15 ERA in 101 innings, and got hurt. And then Dansby Swanson, if you look at Dansby Swanson's baseball reference page, there's no sign of him ever being a Diamondback because was in the minor leagues and he's played all the way to free agency and been a tremendous player for the Braves. So, yes, that sometimes you get a guy on the phone and they're willing to part with somebody and you have no idea why. Maybe they've got a player that they just the old regime doesn't like, and it's like, yeah, you could have Kadarius Toney for a number 3 and a number 6. Sorry to switch sports on you there, but but I mean, I think it's instructive. Brett Veach understands, you've got get guys on the phone. You never know what you might be setting something up for 6 months from now, a year from now. Might not be now. If they want Brady Singer, maybe they don't offer you enough, but maybe you find out during those trade negotiations there's a player that he mentioned that you didn't think was available. It's like, well, maybe they're kind of soured on this guy. Maybe you go back and you figure out a way to pry that guy for a different prospect. So, conversation is important. Keeping those lines of communication open are important. And I'm hoping Picollo will be more aggressive on that front than Dayton Moore was.
And to use that reference, we found out this past week, or maybe it was the week before, Patrick Mahomes saying, yeah, we talked in the summer about Kadarius Toney. Like, they had guys that they were discussing in the offseason, didn't come to fruition, but the groundwork had been laid, right? Yep. Like, Giants knew there was interest in Kansas City. When they finally said, okay, we're out, like, what are we going to do? What can we get? They went to the Royals and they went to Brett Veach and they got that deal done. Same kind of thing happens in baseball. And I do appreciate your point, talking about the deals. Like, there are suckers out there, right? Like, they're out there. And I think in baseball, I don't think there's any excuse for not making deals now because it's very different. Back in the old days, every offseason you were trying to contend, right? Like, no fan base tolerated that you weren't doing everything you could to win the World Series now, right? Every move was supposed to be made for now. Now there is an acceptance of small market baseball. We accept right now. Like, J.J.Picollo has kind of put it in front of us. 23 is not our year. We're looking at 24. We're all willing to take that. So there are buyers and there are sellers, right? There are very few deals that are our hitter for your hitter, our pitcher for your pitcher. We like your kind of guy better than this guy. Yeah, this matches up. There are buyers and sellers. And that means that there are always things, not always, but oftentimes, more often than not, and certainly over the course of 2 years, you can't tell me that there hasn't been opportunities for you to buy if you're a buyer or for you to sell if you're a seller, because there are teams that will overpay or will just, it's not even about overpaying. It's about need right now versus need in the future. So there's no excuse for the Royals at this time to not be able to make deals.
I think, I mean, and it's a rare luxury. And the one thing I'll push back about the idea of teams, fan bases, understanding now that teams, there's expectation you don't have to win every year. Sometimes you have to rebuild. Is that now that there are 12 playoff teams, as much as it drives me kind of batty that you could be so mediocre and make the playoffs, I think it also means that it does reduce the incentive to tank, because if you are a mediocre team, you don't have to get much better in order to make the playoffs. And as the Phillies showed us, you get into the tournament, anything can happen. So I think my hope is the one good thing will come out of having more playoff games is that we will see less tanking, because it's going to become a little bit more socially unacceptable to tank, when it's like you don't even have to be good. Just, even just trying a little bit, you can make it. However, that does mean that when there are teams, and there are always going to be teams that are just clearly so bad that they have no, there's no point in them trying, that is going to become a sort of luxury, in that if there are very few teams that are sort of trying to lose, it becomes more of a seller's market for the talent that they've got, and they can get more value. So I personally think the Royals should not be going into 2023 with an attitude that we have no chance. I don't know if that necessarily means they should be buyers. I don't know if that means they should be sellers either, though. But I think that in the Royals' case, they've got enough talent that's already in the system that's just not producing, that they can try to improve just with the talent they have on hand already. And I think that one judicious, free agent signing, we've talked about that, and we'll probably talk more about that as we get closer to the December winter meetings. But I think that and the talent they have on hand and better coaching is enough for 2023 with the goal of going all in for next winter.
Paul Hoover. Let's talk about Paul Hoover. Reports are that he will be the bench coach for the Kansas City Royals, former catcher by trade as a player. He was the Rays. What was the title?
I think it was a major league field coordinator
for
the last 4 years. Yeah, he was hired. He similar. I mean, not surprisingly, he actually has a very similar resume to Matt Couture, where Matt Couture was a couple of years ago. Both of them drafted by the then Devil Rays. They kind of. It's interesting that they were both in that organization. When it was an incompetently run, one of the really joke organizations in the sport for the first 10 years, and then ownership change led to general manager change, led to an entire culture change, led to the Rays becoming this sort of lean, mean, efficient machine on a low budget for the last 13, 14 years now, or since 2008. So he's seen both sides of it. And was, I believe, managed in their system for a couple of years, and then was hired to be their field coordinator, which I think the responsibilities are things like moving the outfielders around, positioning players, which is a role that involves a lot of data. So, he's certainly not going to be averse to that. I can't say much about his abilities. I know very little, but again, coming from the Rays organization, it's not surprising that Couture would want somebody he knows and is familiar with. What I think we can say is that it's probably a good thing that the Royals will have not one, but two guys in the dugout. Basically the top two ranking men in the dugout every game are guys who are coming from the Tampa Bay Rays. If he's going to make one hire from that organization, we'll see what they do on the pitching side, of course. But I think there are lots of talented pitching coaches from all organizations out there. Whereas the bench coach, I think the one of the important jobs there, one of the important roles is simply having a rapport with the manager, that you guys are kind of on the same page. So this is one where, yes, you completely understand him wanting somebody he knows, he's comfortable with, that is going to be a sounding board for him for his ideas, but at the same time, somebody who will support him. And yeah, I mean, I think the Royals, when they hired Couture, they knew that, and part of the deal is if you're hiring a manager from the Rays, you're probably going to get a bench coach from the Rays too. And that's a good thing. And I'm on board.
Yeah, I could have seen a bench coach coming from the Guardians if it was somebody
that would be the other possibility. Somebody else.
But by the way, the report coming from Mark Topkin, who I had on my radio show about a week ago, who has covered the Rays since before their inception, covered the building of the stadium of the Rays, like getting and attracting baseball to Tampa.
Wow, that goes back to the 80s.
Yes, and has covered every single season that the Rays have been a baseball organization. So not a guy throwing darts.
No, I think we can trust this report.
Yes, yeah. Great. And I had a great conversation with him talking about Matt Couture about maybe it was Monday. I can't remember if it was last Friday or this past Monday. But anyway, it really knows the Rays forward and backward. And then one other thing we want to talk about before we go, and that is the Astros, the ultimate numbers game, deciding that not only does the manager not really matter, the general manager doesn't matter either. Jim Crane, letting go, or was it Crane?
Yeah,
I get the GM and the owner mixed up with the names.
Well, I get confused because the previous owner was Drayton McLean, and I think I'm always confusing those names together. So
yes, but cutting loose the GM who just won a world championship, go figure. Okay, you can analyze that till you're blue in the face, but this is where I think baseball has always been ahead of the game when it comes to other sports. When quality front office people are available, they make room. They don't go like, oh, we don't have an opening. Sorry. They go, oh, here's a talented guy. Let's bring him into the equation. You would like to solicit be an addition for the Royals front office. Yes.
Yes, I would. I put together a little something almost like a soliloquy. I haven't had time to finish it, but we'll run with this.
Okay.
So in just 3 years on the job, James Click has already had one of the most successful tenures of any general manager in the 21st century. Yes, he took over the reins of the Houston Astros, who were coming off of 3 consecutive 100-win seasons and an American League pennant when he was hired. But he was hired under the most awkward and pressure-packed of circumstances. He was given the task of picking up the pieces after the Astros had disgraced themselves with their trash can cheating scandal, one that ended the baseball career of his predecessor, Jeff Luhnow, and has stuck to the managers, coaches, and players who were implicated in it ever since. In his first season, Click also had to navigate a pandemic-shortened 60-game season, one in which the Astros were lucky to make the playoffs at all after going 29-31. But they wound up finishing just 1 game short of the World Series before losing the ALCS to the Rays in 7 games. The next year, the Astros won the pennant before losing to the Braves in the World Series. And the year after that, this year, the Astros finished as world champions. This made them only the second team this century to lose the World Series 1 year and come back to win it the next. You may have heard of the other team, the 2014-2015 Kansas City Royals. 1 week ago, James Click was on top of the world. Today, he is unemployed. He is unemployed not because he is bad at his job, but because his boss, the owner of the Houston Astros, did not appreciate him and inexplicably refused to offer him a contract of longer than 1 year. And that means that right now, James Click is one of the most coveted free agents on the market. But unlike the other guys at the top of the list, the Royals can afford him. The Royals can't offer Aaron Judge $40 million a year. They don't have the assets to trade for Shohei Ohtani. But they can absolutely find room in their budget and room in their front office for James Click. Now, full disclosure, James Click was my colleague at Baseball Prospectus many years ago. And when I was interviewed by a major league team 9 years ago, he was one of the people I reached out to and had a conversation with. I have not talked to him since, however. We are not close. This is not a matter of self-interest. Unless you define self-interest as, I'm a fan of the Kansas City Royals, and I want them to win. And I think James Click would absolutely help this team win. Now, every team in baseball, other than the Astros, is probably looking at hiring James Click. But I do think the Royals are they have a unique opportunity to do so. They can offer him what Scott Boras would call a pillow contract. You may have heard that term. Carlos Correa just signed a pillow contract with the Twins, one that allowed him to leave after 1 year. James Click will probably be at the front of any general manager opening that occurs. But right now, there is no general manager opening. So what the Royals can do is offer him whatever he wants. He can be the assistant general manager. He can be special assistant to the general manager. He can offer his services in whatever way, shape, and form the Royals and him think is necessary. And they can pay him at the top of the market for a man in that role because let's say it's $1 million a year. Well, $1 million a year is barely the major league minimum for the last guy on your roster. The Royals can absolutely afford James Click. And the question, John Sherman, is, can you really afford not to hire him? That's my sports reporter's best audition right there.
That's as good as it gets, and you are right. Like the money that can be spent. We talked on coaches, front office. That's the place to go, and you cannot be afraid. And it would be an incredible move if J.J.Picollo brought him in, because I think there's some people who would say like, well, I'm not going to bring in a guy who's just won the World Series in my job. If the Royals brought him into this mix, knowing that it's probably a 11-month stay, right, with it. But it's 11 months of getting a guy who knows what a championship looks like to put eyes on your organization, get his input, get his thoughts, get his ideas. Those would be 11 very valuable months.
It's maybe the one organization that you look at is a more better run machine than Tampa Bay Rays are. You just hired some of the best guys available on the Rays, and now you can hire the world champion winning general manager of the Houston Astros. I should point out his assistant general manager also was fired the other day. I believe his name is Scott Powers. I suppose I wouldn't look too aversely if the Royals brought him in instead. But I'm just saying the Royals can think big. If they can't think big on premier free agents on the field, they can 100% think big when it comes to front office types. And this is not an opportunity that comes out very often. So take advantage of it. Find a way to make it work. And we'll all be thankful.
100% agree. Great way to wrap things up, Randy. Nice work. Nice work, my friend. That is the good doctor.
Well, you pay me the big bucks, Soren.
Yeah. Dr. Rany Jazayerli, of course, one of the co-founders of Baseball Prospectus and cohort of James Click back in the day. So there you go. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810, 810WHB.com. You can catch my radio show 2 to 6 Central Times. If you're catching us via the podcast, remember we stream live Sunday nights at 10 p.m. Central. We'd love for you to be a part of the conversation. You can do it as many of our good friends have here. Do it via the YouTube, via the Facebook, and via the Twitch. If you follow us on that, follow me on that, you can be a part of that conversation. So we look forward to talking more Royals baseball, hopefully with the coaching staff starting to come together officially for the Royals, and looking ahead to the winter meetings with more moves. We will be back at it 1 week from tonight on Kaufman Corner. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. All things parking lot, only one place you need to go, and that is GannAsphalt.com. If you've got a business and you've got parking lot questions, they can solve all of your problems. Great folks, great Kansas City company, online at GannAsphalt.com, GannAsphalt.com. If you are spelling challenged like I am, check them out. Great folks, great company, can handle any and all of your parking lot needs. So for Dr. Rany Jazayerli, my name is Soren Petro. Thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.